This is our video for our Lesson 13 words. Our first word is haughty. The haughty athlete, it's describing athlete, so it's an adjective, constantly bragged about his success on the football field. Bragged is our key here, is our clue to figure out what this word means. If somebody brags about their success, then they're going to be arrogant or proud. I'm not sure why they gave us the same synonym, arrogant, but nevertheless, there it is. You guys might know people who are haughty. They're not typically nice to be around because nobody wants to hear someone continually bragging about their accomplishments. I think that's why there's all this kind of flack towards Cam Newton after the loss of the Super Bowl for the Panthers because I like him, but he does tend to be haughty with his celebrations and such, and with his behavior in the interview after the Super Bowl. A lot of people weren't happy with him. So it's kind of like the old saying goes, which is actually in the Bible, it's not just an old saying, pride goes before the fall. Haughty. Our next word is envisage. Here's our sentence. When you envisage success, you often attain it. Look at the middle of the word, vis, think of vision, think of seeing, and that's going to help you figure out what this word means. It is a verb because you're doing something, and it means to form a mental picture, imagine, visualize. I'm sure athletes often do this. Maybe a basketball star or player will envisage him or herself getting that basket through the hoop. A quarterback might envisage himself throwing that perfect pass to get that touchdown. If you picture it in your mind, oftentimes you can accomplish it. Next is denigrate. This is another verb. This is a negative word though. Time and time again, evidence shows that ads which denigrate opponents are more effective than positive ads. So this is the opposite context clue because if you are denigrating someone, you are not being positive towards them. So of course, again, we're in our political season and you're going to see ads on TV with the different candidates denigrating each other. Right now, it's Republicans denigrating other Republicans. Once we get our final nominee, then we're going to have the Democrat and the Republican nominees denigrating each other, unfortunately. So when you denigrate someone, you attack their reputation, you speak ill or badly about them. You're trying to defame them, you're belittling them, you're looking down upon them because you want other people to think more highly of you so that you're going to have the success, you're going to win the election. The opposite would be to praise or promote. Our next word is effusive. This is an adjective, a describing word. It is shocking when an unemotional man of few words suddenly turns effusive. So the opposite context clue is here, just like the previous sentence. Unemotional is going to be the opposite of effusive. If you are an effusive person, you are emotionally excessive. You don't hide your feelings. Overly demonstrative. Think of a drama queen. You know exactly how they're feeling. A lot of times they exaggerate their feelings. Their feelings are gushing out. They're not holding them back. They're not restraining them. The opposite of that would be reserved or restrained. That kind of person, you rarely know what they're feeling because they kind of keep that, as they describe the British often, that British stiff upper lip. Our next word is Holocaust. I'm sure when you guys hear this word, you are automatically thinking of the Holocaust that happened to the Nazis, or from the Nazis to the Jews in World War II. This Holocaust has a lowercase h, so we're not talking about that particular one. The sentence says the rebels would sooner turn their city into a Holocaust than surrender themselves to the invaders. So we're talking in a more general fashion rather than a specific Holocaust. But it means a great or complete destruction of life. So in this context, the rebels would rather have all of their people die than be taken over by the invaders. Holocaust can also happen from natural events. If there's an earthquake and lots of people die, that would be considered a Holocaust. Anything that causes a lot of people to lose their lives. Next is defunct. This is an adjective. Laser surgery has rendered the scalpel, so that tool that surgeons use, defunct in certain applications. So if you look at the word defunct and you break it down, if you look at the prefix D, that prefix is talking about the removal of something or the negation of something. And then if you look at funct, think of functional. So if it's something is defunct, then that function is taken away. It's no longer effective or needed. So that laser surgery, because of the technology, means that you can have an operation without actually having to be cut by this scalpel. If something is defunct, it is no longer in existence. Think of certain technologies that are no longer around. The flip phone is almost defunct, although I guess some people still have them. Synonyms would be invalid or extinct. Next is gape. This is an action word. Drivers who gape at accidents cause traffic backups and more accidents. Think of people who are rubbernecking. They see an accident on the side of the road and they're looking because they want to see the details. They want to know why this accident has happened, and so then they do cause the traffic to back up, oftentimes for miles. But if you gape at an accident or if you gape at anything, basically you're staring with an open mouth. Because you are just amazed with what you are seeing. You can't quite comprehend it or believe it. Next is anachronism. Honor students should recognize this, and even the sentence is similar to what we just read about in Caesar. The author had Roman centurions looking at their digital watches, a distinctly literary anachronism. So, an anachronism is a noun. During the Roman Empire, watches, clocks had not been invented yet. People used the sun to tell the time. And so an anachronism is something or someone existing outside of its proper time. So let's say we're watching a movie that's set during the 1940s and a character walks on the screen, comes into the scene, and they have a cell phone in their hands. That's an anachronism because obviously cell phones weren't around during that time period. So, something that you see either in literature, TV shows, movies, that is not in the proper time period. Next is lament. This is a verb. The orphaned children lamented the loss of their parents. Loss is the clue there. If you are lamenting the loss of something, you're mourning it. You're grieving for it. You're filled with sorrow. You're sad. Think of the book of Lamentations in the Old Testament. Jeremiah is lamenting the state of Israel and how they are filled with sin and they're not following the Lord. And he knows that there are going to be consequences for that, which did happen. They had to go into exile. They lost their country, basically. The opposite is rejoice. Next is nemesis. This is a noun. An outraged humanity is the fatal nemesis of vicious despots. So you guys know what a despot is because that was an earlier word this year. Somebody who is a dictator, somebody who has absolute control. And so if the people in the country are fed up with that despot and they're outraged, they're going to do something to try and stop that despot. So obviously the despot would not be happy about that. So their nemesis is going to be someone or something a person cannot conquer or achieve, or a hated enemy. Synonyms would be rival or adversary. Okay, think of Superman versus Lex Luthor. Lex Luthor is Superman's nemesis. Sherlock Holmes, if you're a Sherlock fan, Moriarty is his nemesis. If you are a Clemson Tiger fan, the Gamecocks would be your nemesis and vice versa. So the opposite of that would be a collaborator, somebody who works with you, or a friend, or even an ally, which I'm going to have you add to your books. So back to humane. Sorry, had an interruption there with my phone ringing. Humane, let me bring the sentence up again. I know we already saw it, but it says the Geneva Conventions help assure humane treatment for prisoners of war. So, adjective describing the kind of treatment, as I already said. Geneva Conventions, this is true. These were treaties and protocols that were signed, some before World War II and then some after, which a bunch of nations signed. I think it was about 96 countries signed, agreeing to how prisoners of war would be treated. And so if a country breaks these rules, breaks these protocols, then they can be brought up on charges. So obviously, though, humane means to be kind and compassionate towards your fellow human beings, to act kindly, to act benevolent, to be considerate of them, to not act in an inhumane fashion, which would be the opposite. Obviously, cruel would also be the opposite of humane. Next is lackey. This is going to be a synonym for a word we had earlier. Again, you're going to be thinking of despicable me because a lackey is a synonym for a minion. Lackeys get ahead by telling only the good news to their bosses. So they're leaving out the bad stuff so that the boss thinks only good about them. So a lackey, just like a minion, is a slavish follower, somebody who kind of acts like a slave, and they fawn, again using another word, they fawn over their bosses. They flatter them just to get what they want. Next is lethal. This is an adjective. You're probably thinking of poison when you hear this. Arlene's constant carping, so her complaining, had a lethal effect. So it's an adjective describing what kind of effect on our goodwill. So, in this context, nobody likes to be around somebody who complains all the time. You get annoyed with them. You don't want to be around with them. Your goodwill towards them wears out. It dies, basically. Your patience ends. And so if something is lethal, it's deadly or fatal. Again, thinking of poison, we're going to see this in Romeo and Juliet at the end of the play. Honors kids already know what happens, so I'm not going to spoil it all the way yet for CP students, but obviously it's going to lead to something bad for Romeo. Synonym would be mortal. We're all mortal. We're all going to die. None of us is going to go on living forever. And then the opposite is harmless. Next is embroil. This is an interesting word. It is a verb. Marilyn became embroiled in controversy after hiring dishonest friends and relatives amid promises of ethics reform. So this is kind of cause and effect. She's probably a politician, and so when she hires people who are dishonest, and when she commits nepotism by hiring friends and relatives, and she has promised that she is going to reform the system, then she's going to be caught up in controversy. She's going to be caught up in conflict. She's going to be drawn into a conflict or fight. The media is not going to let her off. There's going to be constant articles and naysayers against her. Kind of a hint that I use to help me remember what this means is look at the word broil that's within this word. When I broil something in my oven to cook it, I'm setting my oven at the highest temperature. It's like 550 degrees or so. And so it's extremely hot. So when I think of conflict and fighting, I think of hotness because I think of people losing their temper, having choleric behavior, etc. So think broil, think really hot, and hopefully that's going to help you remember conflict and fighting. Next is impertinent, our last word here. This is an adjective, and we also see minion and we see patrician, previous words. You are an impertinent twit, so it's an adjective. Said the patrician, the upper class, the noble person, to the uppity minion. If you are uppity, that means you're snobby. So that's kind of your context clue here. Uppity or impertinent means rude and disrespectful. Insolent, impolite. You never want to be called impertinent by someone, and hopefully none of you guys act this way. It's just not a good thing to do. The opposite would be to be polite or courteous, which is, of course, what all of us want to behave like. So, don't forget to put your pledge at the end of exercise 1 for lesson 13.